Hey guys, tonight we step into a lies that looks peaceful from a distance but quickly proves otherwise. Imagine standing in a quiet field long before sunrise. The air cold, the ground damp beneath your feet, and the only sound being a rooster somewhere far away trying to convince the world it's morning. You might picture gentle countryside, living birds chirping, crops swaying, maybe a cozy farmhouse. But if you were actually dropped into the daily routine of an ancient farmer, there's a very good chance you'd last about half a day before seriously reconsidering your career choices. And honestly, that's being generous. Because the truth is, farming thousands of years ago was not the relaxed pastoral life we sometimes imagine. It was relentless, unpredictable, and physically exhausting in ways that modern life rarely prepares you for. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here and why you're settling in. Feel free to comment your location and the local time where you are right now. It's always interesting to see where in the world people are listening from while drifting off to sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up long before the sun, not because you want to, not because you're an early riser, but because if you don't start the day this early, the crops might fail, and if the crops fail, things become complicated in ways that involve hunger. Your bed is simple. A bundle of straw covered by rough cloth. It creaks quietly as you shift and sit up in the dim interior of your small hut. The walls are made from packed mud and straw, a surprisingly common building method across many ancient farming societies, from the villages of ancient Egypt to early settlements across Europe and Asia. The air inside is cool, and the faint smell of smoke lingers from last night's cooking fire. You stretch slowly, your back already reminding you that yesterday existed, and the day before that, and the day before that. Outside, the world is still dark, but you can hear faint sounds beginning to rise from the village. A door opening somewhere, a goat bleating impatiently, the quiet shuffle of someone else starting their morning routine. Ancient farming communities often woke before dawn because daylight was the most valuable resource they had. Without electric lights, or frankly even decent candles, most of the time the sun dictated the entire schedule of life. Historians know that many early agricultural societies structured their days almost entirely around daylight hours, especially during planting and harvest seasons. You step outside, the ground feels cold beneath your sandals, and the sky above is just beginning to show the faintest hint of pale grey along the horizon. The air carries that calm stillness that only exists before sunrise. For a brief moment, it almost feels peaceful. Almost. Then you remember the field waiting for you. Your field isn't enormous by modern standards. In fact, it's quite small compared to the giant farms we see today. But when every inch of it must be worked by hand or with extremely basic tools, it might as well stretch to the horizon. You glance toward the edge of the village where the farmland begins. Rows of dark earth lie quietly in the early light, waiting. And they will continue waiting whether you feel ready or not. Farming in ancient times required constant attention. Crops needed planting, watering, protecting, harvesting, storing, each task carefully timed according to the seasons. Miss a step, and the entire year's food supply could be at risk. It's a bit like a very high-stakes gardening project, except failure means starvation rather than mild disappointment. You walk slowly toward the small wooden shed where your tools are kept. Calling them tools might be a little generous. A wooden hoe, a simple digging stick, maybe a crude plough if your village is fortunate enough to own one, and even then it's probably shared among several families. Mainstream historical records show that many early farmers relied on extremely simple tools for thousands of years. The wooden ard plough, for example, was used across large parts of the ancient world and barely scratched the soil compared to modern equipment. Which means the rest of the job falls on you. You pick up the hoe and test its weight. It's worn smooth from years of use, possibly generations. Because tools like this weren't replaced very often, they were repaired again and again until there was almost nothing left to repair. Somewhere behind you, another farmer walks past carrying a bundle of rope and mutters a quiet greeting. Everyone here understands the routine. No speeches, no dramatic motivation, just work. Historians still argue whether early farming communities actually experienced better living conditions than the hunter-gatherer groups that came before them. It might sound surprising, but archaeological evidence suggests early farmers sometimes had poorer diets and more physical strain, which is not exactly the glowing advertisement for agriculture you might expect. You finally reach the edge of your field. The soil is dark and cool under your feet. A thin layer of mist hovers above the ground, drifting slowly across the rows of earth. In the distance, the sun finally begins to rise, spreading soft orange light across the countryside. For a moment it looks beautiful, peaceful, almost worth waking up for. But beauty doesn't allow the field. You grip the handle of your tool, step forward into the first row, and begin the slow, repetitive motion that will define most of your day. Lift, strike the soil, pull, step forward, repeat, and somewhere deep down you realize something important about ancient farming life. The hardest part isn't the work itself. It's knowing that tomorrow you'll do it all again. The early morning cold lingers in the air as you continue across the field, the soil slowly turning beneath the steady rhythm of your work. The sun has begun its climb now, rising slowly above the distant hills, casting a warm glow across the land. At first, the light feels gentle, almost comforting, but you know better than to trust morning kindness. By midday, this same sun will feel much less friendly. For now, though, the village is still waking. Behind you, faint sounds drift across the fields. A wooden door creaks open. Someone calls out to a stubborn goat. Chickens begin their daily negotiations with gravity and fences. The small collection of huts that make up your farming village slowly stirs to life. Life in ancient farming communities followed this quiet, predictable rhythm for centuries. Most villages were small, often only a few dozen families clustered together for safety and cooperation. Farming required many hands, and while each family had its own plot of land, survival usually depended on the village working together when needed. You pause briefly, resting the handle of your hoe against your shoulder and stretching your back. The field around you smells of damp earth and early morning air. Mist still clings to the lower ground, slowly thinning as sunlight spreads across the land. In the distance, you see another farmer leading a pair of oxen toward his field. The animals move slowly, their breath visible in the cool morning air. Oxen were among the most valuable helpers an ancient farmer could have. Strong, patient, and capable of pulling heavy plows through stubborn soil, they transformed farming from purely human labor into something slightly more manageable. Slightly, because even with animals, the work was far from easy. The wooden plow, often called an ard, didn't dig deeply into the soil like modern machinery. Instead, it scratched shallow lines across the ground, breaking the surface just enough to prepare it for planting. Historians widely agree that this simple tool remained the backbone of farming for thousands of years across large parts of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, which means fields often required multiple passes before the soil was truly ready. You watch the farmer and his oxen for a moment as they begin their slow march across the land. The plow drags behind them, carving a thin line through the soil. It's steady work, slow work. But in ancient agriculture, patience was part of survival. You return your attention to your own row of earth. Lift, strike, pull, step forward. Again and again. Your arms move automatically now, falling into a rhythm that will repeat hundreds, sometimes thousands of times before the day is done. This kind of repetitive labor shapes the body in noticeable ways. Archaeologists studying ancient skeletons have often found signs of intense physical strain in farming populations, thickened joints, warm bones, and muscle attachments that suggest a lifetime of heavy labor. In other words, your future chiropractor would be very interested in meeting you. You pause again to wipe your forehead with the back of your arm. The sun is climbing higher now, and the coolness of morning is slowly giving way to warmer air. A gentle breeze moves through the field, rustling the tall grasses along the edges. Nearby, a small group of children runs past on their way to help with another field. Even the youngest members of the village usually had small responsibilities, collecting sticks for fires, watching animals, or helping with lighter farming tasks. There wasn't much room for idle time in ancient agricultural life. Every pair of hands mattered. Some historians still debate exactly how many hours ancient farmers worked during the year. While harvest seasons were brutally intense, there were also quieter periods between planting and gathering. But during the busy times like nowadays could stretch from before sunrise until long after sunset, you lean on your tool again and glanced toward the irrigation ditch running along the edge of the field. Water is everything. Without it, crops fail quickly. Many ancient civilizations built impressive irrigation systems to control water flow. In places like Mesopotamia, farmers dug long canals to carry water from rivers across dry farmland, turning otherwise barren land into productive fields. But irrigation could also create problems. Too much water could flood crops. Too little could leave them withering under the sun. Historians still argue whether early irrigation systems sometimes damage farmland over time by leaving salt deposits in the soil. In certain regions, these salty layers eventually made farming more difficult, forcing communities to adapt or move. Agriculture, it turns out, has always been a bit of a gamble. You step toward the ditch and scoop a handful of cool water to splash across your face. The shock of it wakes you up instantly. For a moment, the day feels manageable again. As you straighten up, you notice something odd in the soil near your feet. A small clay figurine. It's half buried in the dirt, worn smooth by time. You brush away the soil and hold it in your hand. The shape resembles a tiny animal, perhaps a cow or a bull. Objects like this weren't uncommon in ancient farming communities. Some farmers buried small charms or figurines in their fields, hoping to bring good luck to their crops. It might sound strange today, but agriculture was full of superstition. Some people believed certain gods controlled the harvest. Others trusted rituals, offerings, or symbolic objects buried beneath the soil. A quirky historical tidbit from ancient Rome even suggests that some farmers performed small ceremonies before planting seeds, asking the spirits of the land to protect the coming harvest. Did it actually help? That's harder to say. But when your survival depends on unpredictable weather and fragile crops, you're probably willing to try almost anything. You place the figurine carefully on a nearby rock. No reason to disturb someone else's good luck. The sun climbs higher. The mist disappears completely now, leaving clear blue sky above the fields. The village behind you has fully awakened, and the quiet countryside hums with activity. Tools strike soil. Animals shuffle across farmland. Voices call across the fields. Another full day of ancient farming is underway, and you're only just getting started. By the time the sun has fully cleared the horizon, the field has already begun to change. The damp earth that greeted you earlier is slowly drying under the growing warmth of the morning light. Each step now leaves a faint dust behind your sandals, a quiet reminder that the soil itself is always shifting, sometimes helpful, sometimes stubborn. You pause for a moment, leaning slightly on the handle of your tool. Ahead of you stretches the next phase of the day's work, ploughing, or, more accurately in your case, helping guide the plough while a patient pair of oxen does the slow, heavy pulling. The animals stand nearby, their massive shoulders rising and falling as they breathe steadily. They are calm creatures, accustomed to this daily routine. The wooden yoke rests across their necks, worn smooth by years of use. You give one of them a gentle pat along its side. The ox barely reacts, except for a lazy flick of its ear. Historians know that oxen were some of the earliest draft animals used in agriculture, especially across ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and much of Europe. Their strength made them ideal for pulling ploughs, carts, and heavy loads long before horses became widely used for farm labor. Without them, ancient farming would have been dramatically slower and much harder. You guide the animals forward. The wooden art plough scrapes into the soil behind them, cutting a shallow line through the earth. It doesn't dig deeply, but it loosens the surface enough for planting later. The movement becomes a slow procession. Step, pull, scrape, turn, again and again. The oxen move at a steady pace, and your job is mostly to guide the plough and keep the animals moving in roughly straight lines. Roughly is the important word here. Perfect rows are a modern luxury. You glance behind you at the line of freshly disturbed soil stretching across the field. It isn't perfectly straight, but it will do. In ancient farming, good enough was often the standard. As you reach the end of the row, you gently turn the animals around. The plough drags through the soil again as you begin the next line. Hours of this lie ahead. Ancient farmers spent an enormous amount of time preparing their fields this way. Even a small plot of land could take several days to fully plough, especially if the soil was rocky or packed tightly from previous seasons. And sometimes it was worse. Very dry soil could harden into something resembling baked clay, forcing farmers to break it up slowly with hand tools before the plough could even move through it. Historians studying early agricultural settlements have found evidence of these struggles in soil layers and tool marks left behind centuries ago, which means that yes, people thousands of years ago were also occasionally standing in fields wondering why the dirt was being so difficult. You pause again as the oxen stop naturally, sensing your hesitation. The sun is noticeably higher now, and the warmth is spreading across your shoulders. Morning coolness fades quickly in the open fields. Nearby, another farmer calls out to his animals, encouraging them forward. His voice carries easily across the open land. Work continues everywhere you look. Across the countryside, dozens of small fields are slowly being turned and prepared, each family working their own patch of earth, but all following the same seasonal schedule. Agriculture demanded careful timing. Plant too early, and the seeds might freeze or rot. Plant too late, and crops might not mature before the growing season ended. Historians still argue whether ancient farmers relied more on observation of the weather or on traditional calendars passed down through generations. Some early civilizations even watched the stars to decide when planting should begin. For example, ancient Egyptian farmers famously tracked the rising of the star Sirius, which signaled the annual flooding of the Nile, a crucial event that refreshed farmland with nutrient-rich soil. You might not have an astronomical observatory handy, but you definitely understand the importance of timing. You urge the oxen forward again. The plough scrapes along, carving another long line into the soil. Your arms ache slightly from guiding the wooden handle, and your hands are already beginning to feel the familiar roughness of splinters and worn wood. Ancient farming tools were simple, but that simplicity meant they required a lot of human effort to operate. Metal tools existed in some regions, but many farmers still relied heavily on wood and stone implements, depending on the era and location, and repairs were constant. If the plough breaks, the work stops, which usually means you spend the next hour trying to fix it with whatever rope, leather straps, or wooden pegs you can find. Speaking of which, you notice a faint creaking sound coming from the plough as it moves through the soil. Not a great sign. You stop and kneel beside the wooden frame, inspecting the connection where the blade meets the beam. A small crack runs along the edge. Nothing catastrophic yet, but definitely something to watch. Ancient farmers often had to become part carpenter, part mechanic, and part problem solver, simply to keep their equipment working. You tighten the rope binding around the joint and give it a firm tug. That should hold for now. Somewhere nearby, a crow lands on the edge of the field and watches you with what feels like mild judgment. Crows were a common sight around farmland, often searching freshly turned soil for insects and worms. Farmers had mixed feelings about them. Sometimes helpful for pest control, sometimes annoying when they started showing too much interest in newly planted seeds. A quirky tidbit from ancient Europe even suggests that some farmers hung shiny objects in their fields to scare birds away. Primitive scarecrows also existed surprisingly early, which means the idea of a lonely figure standing in a field to frighten birds is actually thousands of years old. You stand up again and guide the oxen forward once more. Row by row, the field slowly changes. Dark earth turns over under the plough, releasing the rich smell of soil that hasn't seen sunlight in months. Your shoulders grow heavier. Your legs grow tired, and yet the work continues with steady persistence, because in ancient farming life, there's a simple rule everyone understands. The field doesn't care how tired you are. By late morning, the field looks very different from when you first stepped into it before sunrise. Where there was once a smooth stretch of untouched soil, there are now long rows of freshly disturbed earth stretching across the land. The lines aren't perfectly straight. Ancient farming rarely allowed for perfection, but they're good enough to prepare the ground for what comes next. Planting. You guide the oxen to the side of the field and loosen the wooden yoke from their shoulders. The animals seem grateful for the break, immediately lowering their heads to nibble at the grass growing along the edge of the irrigation ditch. You stretch your arms slowly, feeling that familiar heaviness settling into your shoulders. Ploughing may be done for now, but the workday is far from over. In fact, planting might be even more important, because every seed you place into the soil carries a quiet kind of gamble. You walk back toward the village path, where a small sack rests near a fence post. Inside it are the seeds you saved from last year's harvest. They rattle softly as you lift the bag, each tiny grain representing the possibility of future food. Ancient farmers depended heavily on saving part of their harvest for the next planting season. Grain crops like wheat, barley, and millet were common across many early farming societies because they stored well and could survive long periods without spoiling. But saving seeds also carried risk. If the harvest had been poor the previous year, farmers sometimes faced a difficult choice: eat the grain now to survive the winter, or save it and hope the next harvest would be better. Historians studying ancient settlements have found evidence that some communities occasionally struggled with exactly this problem. Storage pits filled with grain were often carefully protected, sometimes even hidden underground to keep pests and thieves away. You loosen the top of the sack and reach inside. The seeds feel smooth and dry in your hand. You walk back toward the freshly plowed rows and begin the slow process of scattering them across the soil. A handful here, a few steps forward, another handful. Planting by hand requires patience and practice. Spread the seeds too close together, and the plants compete for space and nutrients. Scatter them too widely and the field may not produce enough food. Over generations, farmers developed a natural sense for how much seed to use. It wasn't precise like modern agriculture, but experience counted for a lot. The sun climbs higher as you move across the field. The morning coolness is gone now, replaced by steady warmth. Your shadow grows shorter as midday approaches. You continue the slow rhythm of planting. Step, scatter, step, scatter. Occasionally, you pause to lightly rake soil over the seeds, using the back of your hoe, helping protect them from birds and wind. Nearby, a pair of sparrows watches your progress carefully. Birds were one of the oldest rivals of farmers everywhere. A freshly planted field might look like a free buffet to a hungry flock. Some ancient farmers developed clever tricks to keep them away. Historians have discovered that simple noise-making devices like wooden clappers or hanging shells were sometimes used to scare birds from fields. Early scarecrows also appeared in several ancient cultures, often made from bundles of straw tied to wooden poles, which means somewhere, thousands of years ago, a farmer probably spent time building something that looked vaguely human just to confuse birds, and judging by how long scarecrows have stuck around, the idea must have worked at least occasionally. You glance toward the edge of your field again. A few more birds have gathered now, hopping cautiously along the ground behind you. They wait patiently for any seed you might miss. You sigh quietly. They're persistent. But you can't spend the whole day chasing birds. You keep planting. Agriculture has always involved a strange partnership with nature. Farmers depend on natural cycles: sunlight, rain, fertile soil, but they also spend a lot of time defending their crops from the very same natural world. Weeds creep into fields, insects chew through leaves, animals dig up seeds. Historians still argue whether early farmers spent nearly as much time protecting crops as they did growing them. Evidence from ancient fields suggests pest damage could sometimes destroy large portions of a harvest, and without modern pesticides or fertilizers, farmers had limited ways to fight back. Some tried unusual solutions. In ancient Rome, for example, agricultural writers recorded strange remedies for crop problems, including burying certain animal parts in fields to ward off pests. One ancient writer even suggested that placing the skull of a donkey in a garden might protect vegetables from disease. Did it work? Well, historians remain skeptical. But when your food supply depends on a few fragile plants, you're probably willing to experiment. The field slowly fills with seeds as you continue your careful walk across the rows. The sack grows lighter in your hand. Your legs grow heavier. The sun now sits high overhead, shining directly across the land. Heat rises from the soil in soft waves, and the distant hills shimmer slightly in the bright light. You pause again, resting your hands on your hips. From here, the village looks peaceful. Small huts scattered along the edge of the fields. Thin trails of smoke rising from cooking fires. Children running along the dirt paths. But you know better than to be fooled by the peaceful view, because farming life always comes back to the same truth. Every meal, every winter, every year of survival, all of it begins right here in the dirt beneath your feet. And right now, there are still plenty of seeds left to plant. By the time the last handful of seeds leaves the sack, the sun has climbed to its highest point in the sky. The gentle morning warmth has transformed into something much heavier now, pressing down on the open fields with steady determination. You stand quietly for a moment, looking across the rows you've just planted. From a distance, the field doesn't look very different. A stranger passing by might not even realize that hundreds of tiny seeds now rest beneath the soil, each one holding the fragile promise of future food. But you know they're there, and for the first time today, you allow yourself a brief pause. Midday is one of the few moments when ancient farmers sometimes slowed their pace, especially in hotter regions. Working under the blazing sun for too many hours could exhaust both people and animals. So short breaks were not just pleasant, they were practical. You walk toward the narrow strip of shade cast by a lone tree near the edge of the field. The grass beneath it feels cooler as you sit down, stretching your legs out in front of you. The ground is uneven, but comfortable enough for a short rest. Nearby, the oxen stand quietly chewing grass, their slow movements almost hypnotic. The village lies a short distance behind you now. From here, you can hear the faint hum of daily life, continuing voices calling across yards, the clatter of pottery, the occasional bark of a dog chasing something it probably shouldn't be chasing. You reach into the small cloth bundle tied to your belt and pull out your midday meal. It's simple, a small piece of coarse bread, maybe a handful of dried beans or olives, depending on what your household had available. Ancient farmers didn't enjoy elaborate lunches. Most diets were built around staple crops, grain, legumes, and whatever vegetables could grow reliably in the region. In many early farming societies, bread made from barley or wheat formed the backbone of daily meals. Historians studying ancient grain remains have discovered that barley was especially common in many farming communities because it grew more reliably in difficult conditions. You break off a piece of bread and chew slowly. It's dense and a little dry, but after hours of work, even simple food tastes satisfying. A small breeze moves through the tree branches above you, stirring the leaves and carrying the scent of warm soil across the field. For a moment, the world feels calm, but farming life rarely stays calm for long. You glance back toward the rows of planted soil and think about what comes next. Waiting, which might sound relaxing, but in agriculture, waiting is rarely peaceful. Because once the seeds are planted, an entirely new list of worries begins. Will it rain enough? Will it rain too much? Will pests arrive? Will the soil stay fertile? Historians still argue whether ancient farmers had reliable ways to predict weather patterns. Some cultures used seasonal calendars based on star movements or river cycles, but day-to-day weather remained unpredictable. In other words, farming has always involved a certain amount of hoping for the best. You finish the last of your bread and brush the crumbs from your hands. As you sit there, your eyes wander toward the irrigation canal that runs along the edge of the fields. Water is the quiet ruler of farming life. Without it, seeds remain just seeds. Many ancient civilizations built complex irrigation systems to manage water supplies. In Mesopotamia, farmers dug canals stretching for miles, guiding river water across dry land to feed their crops. In Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile naturally watered farmland, leaving behind rich layers of fertile silt. But irrigation could be tricky. Too much water might drown young plants. Too little could leave them shriveling in the heat. A quirky historical detail from ancient farming texts even suggests that some farmers believed certain plants preferred to be watered during specific phases of the moon. Whether that actually made a difference is still debated, but the idea shows just how closely ancient people watched the rhythms of nature. You stand up slowly, stretching again as your muscles protest the sudden movement. Rest time is over. There are always smaller tasks waiting around the farm. You walk along the edge of the irrigation ditch, checking the small openings that allow water to flow into different fields. If the canal becomes blocked by mud or debris, parts of the farmland might not receive enough water. Using a short wooden stick, you clear a small buildup of soil near one opening. The water immediately begins flowing more smoothly. Simple systems like this required constant maintenance. Ancient irrigation networks were impressive, but they relied on farmers regularly clearing channels and repairing banks. Neglect them for too long, and the entire system could fail. As you continue along the ditch, you notice movement in the grass ahead. A small animal darts across the path, a rabbit, or perhaps a hare vanishing quickly into the taller plants near the field edge. Animals like that can be trouble for crops. They might dig up seeds or nibble on young plants once they sprout. And rabbits are surprisingly determined when they discover an easy food source. You make a mental note to check the field again in a few days. Farmers throughout history have faced the same challenge, protecting crops from hungry wildlife. Some built fences, others set simple traps. And sometimes farmers simply accepted that nature would take a small share of the harvest. The sun continues its slow movement across the sky. Afternoon approaches now, and the heat lingers across the open fields. Your field is planted, your tools are still waiting nearby, and there is always more work to do. Because in ancient farming life, the day rarely ends when the planting does. The short rest beneath the tree fades quickly into memory as you return to the tools lying near the edge of the field. The afternoon sun hangs heavily above the countryside now, bathing everything in bright, steady light. Shadows have grown short and sharp, and the warmth pressing down on your shoulders reminds you that the day is only halfway finished. Planting the seeds was important, of course, but planting alone doesn't guarantee anything. Fields require constant attention, and the tools you rely on, simple as they are, need care as well. You kneel beside the wooden plow again and inspect the crack you noticed earlier in the beam. The rope binding you tightened before has held so far, but the wood still creaks faintly when you press on it. Ancient farming tools were often built from whatever materials were available nearby. Wood formed the backbone of most equipment, sometimes reinforced with metal tips if the village had access to iron or bronze. But metal was expensive, which meant most farmers relied heavily on wood, leather straps, and rope to keep everything working. You pull a small wooden peg from your pouch and push it carefully into the crack along the beam, tapping it gently with the handle of your hoe. The repair isn't elegant, but it should hold long enough to get through the season. Improvisation is part of the job. Historians studying ancient farm sites often find evidence of repeated repairs on tools patches, bindings, and replacements added over years of use. Farming equipment wasn't thrown away easily. Every piece of wood, every strip of leather had value. You stand again and lift the hoe, testing its balance. The blade is slightly dull, worn down from striking soil and small stones day after day. But it still works. That's what matters. You walk slowly along the rows of your field, scanning the ground for anything that might cause problems later. A small stone catches your eye. Then another. Rocks were one of the quiet enemies of ancient farmers. Even a small stone buried beneath the surface could damage tools or block young roots trying to grow downward. You bend down and pick up the first rock, tossing it toward the edge of the field. Over time, many ancient farmers built low stone walls along the borders of their land using rocks gathered from their fields. Some of those walls still exist today, quietly marking farmland that has been worked for centuries. You continue walking. Stone, toss. Stone, toss. Stone. It's not exciting work, but removing obstacles now saves trouble later. In the distance, you hear voices drifting across the countryside. A small group of villagers moves along the dirt road between fields, carrying baskets and tools. Community work is common in farming life. Sometimes neighbors help each other during the busiest seasons, especially during planting and harvest, when timing matters most. Historians still debate how cooperative ancient farming communities truly were. Some evidence suggests strong village cooperation, while other records hint that competition and disputes over land or water occasionally caused tension. Either way, farming tied people together. No single household could easily manage every challenge alone. You stop near the irrigation ditch again and scoop up a handful of water, letting it run across your wrists. The coolness is refreshing. Nearby, insects buzz lazily above the grass. A dragonfly darts through the air, catching smaller bugs with remarkable precision. Insects are another constant presence in farming life. Some are helpful, like the dragonfly hunting mosquitoes. Others are far less welcome. Locusts, for example, have haunted farmers throughout history. These swarming insects could strip entire fields of crops in a matter of hours. Ancient writings from Mesopotamia and Egypt describe locust swarms darkening the sky and devouring harvests. Historians know these outbreaks were terrifying events for farming communities that depended entirely on their crops. Thankfully, today seems calm. No clouds of insects on the horizon, just the quiet hum of afternoon life in the countryside. You continue your slow walk through the field, occasionally stopping to smooth a patch of soil or remove another stubborn rock. The sun shifts gradually westward. Time moves differently out here. Without clocks or bells marking the hours, You judge the day by the position of the sun, the length of shadows, and the gradual cooling of the air. Some ancient farmers did use simple timekeeping methods. Sundials existed in certain civilizations, especially in places like ancient Egypt and Greece, but most daily routines didn't require exact measurements. Farmers simply followed the rhythm of daylight, work while the sun shines, rest when it disappears. You glance toward the village again. Smoke rises lazily from a few cooking fires now. Someone has probably begun preparing the evening meal. Your stomach notices this immediately, but the day's work isn't finished yet. You take a final walk along the rows of planted soil, checking that everything looks right. The seeds are hidden safely beneath the surface. The irrigation ditch is flowing smoothly. The stones are mostly cleared. For now, the field is ready to begin its quiet transformation. Over the coming days and weeks, tiny green shoots will push upward through the soil, if the weather cooperates, if pests stay away, if the soil remains healthy. Agriculture is a constant conversation between humans and nature nature doesn't always answer politely. You wipe the dust from your hands and glance up at the sky again. The afternoon sun is finally beginning to soften. Evening will come eventually. But until then, the field and the farmer remain busy. The afternoon sun lingers stubbornly above the fields, and now the heat has fully settled over the countryside like a heavy blanket. The breeze that felt refreshing earlier has grown weaker, leaving the air thick and still. You move slowly along the edge of the field, wiping your forehead with the back of your arm. This is the part of the day when ancient farming becomes less about rhythm and more about endurance. Morning work often feels manageable. The cool air helps, and the energy of a new day carries you forward. But by mid-afternoon, your muscles begin to protest. Your clothes cling with dust and sweat, and every movement feels just a little slower. Still, the work continues. You walk toward the small animal pen near the field's boundary. A few goats shuffle inside, glancing up as you approach. Goats were extremely common animals in ancient farming communities. Unlike larger livestock, goats were hardy and adaptable. They could survive in rocky areas where crops struggled to grow, and they provided milk, meat, and occasionally wool. In many regions of the ancient world, a few goats were a farmer's most reliable companions. You open the rough wooden gate and check the small trough beside the pen. It's nearly empty. The animals watch you with quiet patience, as if they already know what comes next. You carry a small bucket from the irrigation ditch and pour water into the trough. The goats immediately step forward, lowering their heads to drink. Livestock added another layer of responsibility to farming life. Animals needed food, water, shelter, and protection from predators, but they also played a crucial role in the agricultural system. Their manure enriched the soil, helping crops grow stronger year after year. Historians widely recognize animal manure as one of the earliest natural fertilizers used by ancient farmers. Long before chemical fertilizers existed, farmers depended on compost, animal waste, and plant scraps to keep their soil productive. It wasn't glamorous work, but it worked. You close the gate and return toward the field again, stepping carefully over a narrow patch of tall grass. The heat shimmers above the ground now, creating faint waves in the distance. Your stomach reminds you that lunch was small. Ancient farmers often ate modest meals during the day because heavy food could slow them down in the heat. Larger meals usually came in the evening once the hardest work was finished. You reach into your pouch again and pull out a small dried fig saved from earlier. It's wrinkled and slightly sticky from the heat, but sweet when you bite into it. Fruit like figs, dates, and grapes were important additions to ancient diets in many regions. They provided quick energy and could be dried for long-term storage. Historians studying ancient food remains have found dried fruit preserved in storage jars thousands of years old, which means somewhere in the distant past, another tired farmer probably paused under the sun, just like you, chewing a dried fig and hoping the day would move a little faster. You walk back into the field again, scanning the soil carefully. Now comes another familiar task. Weeds, tiny green sprouts that appear where you didn't plant anything. Some are harmless. Others compete directly with crops for water and nutrients. You kneel down and pull one from the soil, shaking the dirt from its roots. Ancient farmers spent countless hours removing weeds by hand. Without modern herbicides, physical removal was the only reliable method. It's slow work. Pull, toss, step forward, pull again. a small lizard darts across the ground beside you, disappearing into a crack between two stones. Creatures like that are part of the quiet ecosystem surrounding farmland. Some help control insects, others simply share the space without causing much trouble. Nature is always present in agriculture, sometimes helpful, sometimes inconvenient. Historians still argue about how sustainable early farming methods truly were. Some evidence suggests that certain ancient societies managed their land carefully, rotating crops and allowing soil to recover. Other civilizations, however, may have overworked their farmland, slowly exhausting the soil until harvests declined. Agriculture, it seems, has always required balance. You straighten up again, stretching your back as another dull ache spreads across your shoulders. The sun is finally beginning its slow descent toward the western hills. The light softens slightly, and the long afternoon shadows begin returning to the field. In the distance, you hear a faint, rhythmic sound. Clack, clack, clack. You look up and see another farmer walking between his rows with a wooden noisemaker swinging from a rope. Each step causes the device to knock together loudly. Birds scatter from the field immediately. It's a simple but effective trick. Some ancient farmers used these noise devices throughout the day to keep flocks from settling in their crops. A quirky historical detail recorded in old farming writings even describes farmers singing or shouting while working simply to keep animals away from newly planted seeds. You consider trying that, but then decide the birds probably don't need a full musical performance. Instead, you continue your slow walk through the rows, pulling weeds, checking soil, watching the sky. Because even as the day grows older, the quiet responsibilities of farming never truly pause. The seeds are planted, the soil is prepared, but the real work of growing food has only just begun. The sun drifts lower in the sky now, and the light across the countryside begins to soften. What was once a harsh white glare during midday slowly turns warmer, painting the fields in gentle shades of gold. You walk slowly toward the dirt path leading back to the village, brushing soil from your hands as you go. The field is quiet again for the moment. The seeds are planted, the weeds you spotted earlier are gone, and the irrigation ditch still carries its steady trickle of water past the edge of the land. But the work of a farmer rarely stays confined to one field. As you approach the village, the sounds of activity grow louder. Voices drift through the air, mixed with the clatter of wooden tools and the occasional bark of a dog chasing something it probably shouldn't be chasing. A small group of villagers stands near the well in the center of the settlement, talking quietly while filling clay jars with water. Villages like this formed the backbone of ancient farming societies. Most communities were small enough that everyone knew each other's routines, strengths, and occasional bad habits. Living close together made cooperation easier and sometimes necessary. You pass by a neighbor repairing a broken fence along the edge of his yard. He lifts a hand in greeting but doesn't stop working. There's always something that needs fixing. Wood cracks, roofs leak, tools wear down. Farming life isn't just about crops. It's about maintaining everything around them. Historians studying ancient villages have found evidence of shared labor projects, where farmers work together on tasks too large for one household. Digging irrigation canals, repairing roads, and building storage structures often required many hands. And in return, the benefits were shared. Water flowed to everyone's fields. Grain could be stored safely. Travel between farms remained possible. You stopped near a large wooden structure at the edge of the village. The granary. It's not particularly fancy, just a raised building made from timber and mud. Brick, but it serves one of the most important purposes in the entire community: storing grain safely. Grain storage was absolutely critical in ancient farming life. Crops were harvested only once or twice a year in many regions, so farmers had to preserve enough food to last through the long months between harvests. Historians know that ancient granaries were often carefully designed to protect food from moisture, insects, and rodents. Raised floors and sealed walls helped keep the harvest dry and safe. Still, protecting stored grain was an ongoing challenge. Mice, rats, and insects were very interested in the same food supply you were. A quirky historical tidbit from ancient Egypt even shows that cats were often welcomed in farming communities, partly because they helped control rodent populations around grain stores, which means some ancient farmer somewhere probably looked at a cat catching a mouse and thought, you know what, you can stay. You continue walking through the village square, children run past you carrying bundles of sticks for evening fires. An older farmer sits on a wooden stool, repairing a worn leather strap that once held a plough harness together. Life here moves at a steady, familiar pace. But there's another side to farming life that occasionally appears. Taxes, or tribute, depending on the time and place. Farmers often owed part of their harvest to local rulers, temples, or landowners. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, farmers frequently paid grain taxes to support city governments and religious institutions. Records carved into clay tablets describe detailed accounting of harvests and payments. Historians still debate exactly how heavy these obligations were for ordinary farmers. Some systems appear relatively fair, while others may have placed serious burdens on rural communities. Either way, a portion of what you grow might never reach your own table. You glance again toward the granary. That building represents survival but also responsibility. Some of its grain will feed the village through winter. Some may go to officials or temple storehouses, and some must be saved for next year's seeds. Agriculture always looks abundant at harvest time, but farmers know better. Every pile of grain must be carefully divided between present needs and future survival. You continue toward your home near the edge of the village. The small mud brick house sits beside a narrow patch of garden where herbs and vegetables grow in tidy rows. Even farmers who worked large grain fields often kept small gardens for additional food. Onions, beans, maybe cabbage or lentils, simple crops that added variety to the daily diet. You pause at the doorway and look back across the farmland. The evening light spreads slowly across the fields now, casting long shadows that stretch toward the village. In the distance, farmers are still finishing their final tasks of the day. A pair of oxen trudges slowly along a dirt path. Someone gathers tools from the edge of a field. A small cloud of birds circles above the land before settling into nearby trees. The countryside is gradually preparing for night. But before the day truly ends, there are still a few more responsibilities waiting. Because for an ancient farmer, even sunset doesn't always mean the work is finished. The evening air begins to cool as the sun continues its slow descent behind the distant hills. The harsh brightness of midday fades into softer light, and the entire countryside takes on that calm golden glow that only appears at the end of a long day. For a brief moment, the land looks peaceful again, but you know better than to assume the work is over. Even after planting, ploughing, repairing tools and tending animals, a farmer's mind continues scanning the fields for problems, because agriculture has a habit of introducing new challenges exactly when you think things are finally under control. You step back out of the village and walk toward the edge of your field one more time. The soil lies quiet beneath the fading sunlight. From the surface, nothing has changed since you planted the seeds earlier, but below ground, those tiny grains are slowly absorbing moisture, beginning the long process that might eventually become food. If everything goes well, you kneel down and run your fingers through the top layer of soil, still slightly damp from the irrigation water earlier. That's a good sign. Moist soil helps seeds begin the delicate process of germination, where the outer shell softens and a tiny root begins pushing downward into the earth. Historians studying ancient farming tools and seed remains know that farmers often relied entirely on observation to judge soil conditions. Without scientific instruments, experience became the most valuable guide. Years of watching the land taught farmers when the soil felt right, when it felt too dry, or when it held too much water. You brush the soil from your hands and stand again, scanning the field carefully. A faint rustling sound reaches your ears. You look toward the far edge of the rows and spot a small cluster of birds hopping cautiously across the dirt. They're searching. Even though most of the seeds are buried safely beneath the soil, birds are remarkably skilled at finding the occasional grain left exposed. You clap your hands sharply. The birds scatter into the air with a flurry of wings, circling briefly before flying toward a nearby tree. This small battle between farmers and birds has likely been happening for as long as people have planted crops. Historians have found ancient scarecrow-like figures in several early farming cultures. Some were simple wooden pole,